Hello, in Chapter 2, we're going to focus on heredity and environment. So, in regards to genetic development, each body cell in our entire body, has 23 chromosome pairs and 46 chromosomes total. And you can see on the right of this slide those pairs from 1 all the way down to the 23rd pair, which for this individual is an X and a Y, which means this individual is male. Chromosomes contain DNA, which is a thread-like structure made up of a very complicated word to say, acid, deoxyribonucleic acid. It has a double helix shape, looks like a spiral staircase, and it contains our genetic information. So genes are segments of DNA. It's the templates for making one or more proteins in the body. Proteins are the building blocks of cells and regulate body processes. Units of hereditary information. It helps the cells to reproduce themselves and to assemble proteins. And the activity of genes, genetic expression, is affected by their environment. And so you can see here, there's a chromosome. Actually we start with a cell at the bottom left in the picture. We go to the nucleus, we see the chromosome, and then we pull it apart, and on the right you can see the DNA in the spiral shape. So DNA replicates through mitosis in the body cells. So the body cells that we were talking about, they reproduce themselves by a process called mitosis. DNA makes reproduction possible through meiosis in reproductive cells. And you can remember that the process of reproduction or replication for eggs and sperm is meiosis, because there is an E there for egg. Cell division that occurs in males and female gametes, and fertilization happens when the sperm and the egg meet to produce a zygote. So our body cells replicate or reproduce themselves through mitosis, and our reproductive cells use the process of meiosis with an E. So sex of the offspring, as we mentioned before, is determined by the 23rd pair of chromosomes. In the egg or ovum, 2 copies of X chromosome are there, and in the sperm, there is either an X or a Y chromosome. Female offspring have 2 X's. Male offspring have X and Y. And in the photo here, you can see a sperm trying to penetrate an egg. So when we talk about how a person, what a person's genetic heritage is, that's called a genotype. And it's the actual genetic material that we saw in our first slide with the 23 pairs. A phenotype, though, is the way an individual's genotype is expressed in observable and measurable physical characteristics. So the phenotype of the individual in the picture is that she has blue eyes and auburn hair and fair skin. That's her phenotype. There are dominant genes and there are recessive genes. So the principles related to that is when one gene of a pair always exerts its effect, it is a dominant gene. It overrides the potential influence of the other gene called the recessive gene. And so a recessive gene exerts itself only if the two genes of a pair are both recessive. And so the ability to roll your tongue, as the woman in the photo is doing, is recessive. And so both parents had to carry that recessive gene, and she had to get two recessive genes in order to be able to do that. So if you can roll your tongue, you have the recessive gene for that, and you got that gene both from your mother and your father, and there was no dominant gene, which if the dominant gene was there, it would overpower the recessive gene. So there are certain disorders related to dominant genes and recessive. Huntington's disease is a dominant disorder, and Huntington's is a symptom that includes destruction of brain and nervous system with accompanying loss of intelligence, muscle control, speech, and balance. So that's a pretty devastating dominant disorder. A recessive disorder is PKU, and the person with PKU cannot convert a certain amino acid to another amino acid, and as a result of eating food with with that type of chemical, individuals with PKU experience brain damage and mental impairment. This recessive disorder of PKU is easily remedied by making sure that you don't eat the foods that cannot be broken down. So not as devastating as Huntington's disease. And so here's an example of PKU transmission. And remember that this is a recessive disorder, just like rolling the tongue. Both parents have to contribute that gene in order for that to be expressed. And here are possibilities. Let's see. So those are the possibilities that could happen. And so in this case, this child got the normal gene from both parents, and so did not have PKU. But this child got a recessive and a dominant, and so this child could be a carrier because that recessive gene is there. And this girl is off. The next girl on the third from the left is also a carrier, but the child on the right got the recessive gene from both parents, and so that child, the fourth child on the right, has PKU. And by the way, this doesn't mean that if you have 4 kids, this is how things will pan out, because this is just an example of what might happen. And so here are some more gene-linked abnormalities. Cystic fibrosis, and this is a glandular dysfunction that affects breathing and digestion, and the treatment is physical and oxygen therapy. And there's one child with cystic fibrosis in every 2,000 births, and you can see diabetes is gene linked, hemophilia, and we already talked about Huntington's and PKU. There's sickle cell anemia, and then spina bifida and Tay-Sachs. So you can take a look at the descriptions of those genetic gene-linked abnormalities, the treatment, and how often they happen. So we're going to do an application assignment using these inherited traits and figure out dominant and recessive. And so you can take a look at this, and you're going to be doing this in your application assignment. So X-linked inheritance, male and female differences in appearance, and polygenetic inheritance would be autism, schizophrenia, learning disabilities. So in other words, characteristics might be located on the X chromosome, and with polygenetic, it means more than one chromosome carries that genetic trait. And so autism, schizophrenia, and learning disabilities would fit into that more than one gene carries the trait. Here, some chromosomal abnormalities. Sometimes when a gamete is formed, the sperm and the ovum do not have the normal set of 23 chromosomes. And so, for example, with Down syndrome, there is an extra chromosome which causes mild to severe retardation and physical abnormalities. Some treatment could be surgery, early intervention, infant stimulation, special learning programs. And then you can see the incidence there. Fragile X, this is a chromosomal that happens on the X chromosome, which comes from mother. This is an abnormality in the X chromosome, can cause mental retardation, learning disabilities, or short attention span. Treatment is special education, speech and language therapy, and it's more common in males than in females. And one of the reasons why is they don't have another X to help strengthen their chromosomal makeup like a female would. And then XYY syndrome is an extra Y chromosome, and this can cause above average height, and this is 1 in every 1,000 male births. So 2 Y chromosomes. So as we mentioned, there's an extra, for Down syndrome, there's an extra 21st chromosome. The risk for Down syndrome increases as mothers get older, especially after the age of 35. And the risk also increases somewhat with father's age as well. There is cognitive disability, short lifespan, heart conditions, and early dementia. Behavioral genetic research designs, how we can determine, how we start research to determine is by looking at twin designs, because twins, especially identical twins, have the same genetic makeup. And we look at those twins that have been adopted and raised in different environments to see whether it's the gene itself or the environment that affects that child's development. So in regards to heritability, there are different amounts of variance accounted for by genes. Generally, this increases with age for most characteristics. Shared heritability refers to similar influences that children and adults raised in the same environment experience. And an example of that is approximately 25% of the variability in IQ scores in children is because of that same environmental experience and the shared heritability. Non-shared environments refers to experiences that are unique to the individual child or adult, and it accounts for about 15% of the heritability. So non-shared characteristics. So there is a shared aspect of heritability and a non-shared aspect. So some limitations of genetic studies. It's challenging to separate genes from the environment and their effects. Genes show different effects in different environments, and environments also influence gene expression. For example, you might have the gene for breast cancer, but it may never be expressed in the environment that you're in. So there is also the evolutionary theoretical perspective that's related to genetics, and that's natural selection and adaptive behavior, Charles Darwin. And he said natural selection is the evolutionary process by which those individuals of a species that are best adapted are the ones that survive and reproduce. Those that do survive and reproduce then pass on those characteristics to the next generation. And so, for example, if we look at the changes in the species of giraffes, the ones as in their environment, the giraffes with longer necks would be better able to reach the foliage at the top of trees, and so they're more likely to live long enough to reproduce, and so their offspring are more likely to have longer necks, whereas the giraffes with shorter necks would not get enough food to survive long enough to reproduce. All organisms must adapt to particular places, climates, food sources, and ways of life. And adaptive behavior is behavior that promotes an organism's survival in their natural habitat. So developmental systems theory also looks at the environment and genetics together. And so there are 4 major levels of the system theory. There's the genetic activity, neural activity, behavior, and the physical, social, and cultural aspects of the environment. And these all affect each other, and that's what they mean by bidirectional influences. And you can see the arrows go both ways for all of those components of development. And then looking at Bronfenbrenner's bioecological model of development, it has the nested circles of development and the influences that come from their immediate experience. And so here you can see his model with the different systems with the child in the center, and then we have school and home and neighborhood, and then the parents work and the school board that runs their school. And so those are all systems of the environment that affect the child's development. And so you can click through this and read the specifics of each of those systems, but you don't have to memorize the systems. Just think about the child in the center, and as the circles go out, the influence of that type of environment lessens.